Welcome to the Mörrum River, angling waters filled with history and tradition. The waters flowed for hundreds of years through the green valleys. Salmon and sea trout have migrated up through the rapids, waterfalls and streams, and man has tried in different ways to capture these desirable beauties. At one time, it was the need for food that made us go fishing. But today, something completely different draws us down to the river. There are those who visit Murrum to fish, while there are others whose lives are devoted to fishing here. We're going to observe life along the river during a season, and we'll meet fishermen from both groups. It's quite difficult to describe in words and pictures what being a Murrum's angler entails. It's about a feeling which an outsider might think is closer to an obsession, but it's really about a deep relationship with the Mörrum River, something quite like love. Let's look at these feelings, perhaps allow ourselves to fall in love. Winters in Murrum can be cold, and this year Jack Frost has held the river in an iron grip of snow and ice. When spring comes and the premier's close, the nervous discussions start. Will the ice be gone so we can fish? Will the weather and the water levels be good for fishing? And above all, will I get a premier fish? The premier on the Mörrum River is something very special. Spring's arrived in its full glory for the Murrum fishermen and expectations are high. The banks are lined with both fishermen and local people. Reporters from the press, radio and TV are here, of course, and there's tension in the air as the starting shots fired from the Salmon World building. At last the season's in full swing and everyone's waiting expectantly for the first catch to be landed. There's a party mood, and the weighing in of the catches is followed with interest.
Vad sa du?
Vi satte 65.
Satt vi 65? Nej, 64, det är 2,44 på den. Också en blank.
The fishing's focused on salmon and trout that have spent winter in the river, and after a slow start, the fish become more active as the day goes by.
Att det skulle gå att ta någon fisk i alla fall. Får jag ta in den? Dankeschön.
Evening comes. Another Murrum premiere has been completed. But the fishing isn't over yet, and most fishermen carry on for a few more days, continuing the party mood along the river for the first week. The spring fishing carries on throughout April, but despite large catches of salmon, it's the sea trout they've come for. Plenty of sea trout have spent the winter above Kungsforsen, and they're fighting fit. You can find them in the lower pools, but here you've got the chance to meet the real challenge of spring. On the last stretch before the sea, you can try your hand with the silver sea trout, the newly arrived trout paying a brief visit, and this fishing's usually best during the second half of April. Many of the silver sea trout are smaller fish in the 1 kilo class, but catching the larger of these ultra shiny power packages is a memorable feat. The silver sea trout haven't come to spawn, but no one knows why they make a short trip up the river. There are lots of theories, but perhaps the trout make this pleasure trip up the river because of their romantic spring urges. Salmon have been fished on the Mörrum River since time immemorial. There was a settlement at Kungsforsen over 3,000 years ago. In July 1908, 2 Englishmen came to Murrum and fished for a month without catching anything. A few years later, 2 other Englishmen came to Murrum and caught the first salmon using flies. But it wasn't until 1939 that people started once again fishing with spinner and flies. On the morning of the 16th of April 1941, 15 fishermen waited eagerly on the riverbank. At 7 o'clock, an historic shot rang out, starting organised angling on the Mörrum River. Lots of fishermen have found their way to the Mörrum River over the years. From royalty and famous anglers to just plain enthusiasts, they've all had the same aim: to catch a large Mörrum salmon or trout. The spring floods start gathering force during April, and to get to the best fishing spots you need to do some serious wading. The stream's running at 55 cubic metres per second, and if you don't know the bottom you should take great care. A stout wading pole's recommended as a support in these fierce currents. The last week of April has arrived, and the normal first flush of excited fishing has been replaced by something else. Everyone's talking about water volumes and temperatures and if anyone has seen one. Yep, they're waiting for the first May salmon to be caught. Winter's been long and cold this year, so it seems a bit early for fishing, but you can always hope. Sometimes the first salmon arrive early, and you don't want to miss that. The fly fishermen are waiting, fishing a bit less and talking a lot more. There's still a chance to catch some of the last sea trout, still in surprisingly good condition, as they return to the Baltic.
öring.
Winter sea trout, in fairly good condition. Back you go.
Den får simma tillbaka. Ska vi inte leka med den?
Det är två fiskar som skänker på flugan.
From the centre of southern Sweden, this lively river starts its meandering journey to the sea. The Mörrum River is 183 kilometres long and flows into the Baltic at Pukovik. We'll follow the salmon and sea trout on their way up to their spawning grounds. Salmon swim long distances in the Baltic in the hunt for food, while the trout keep to a limited local area. After a few years in the sea, it's now time to return to the spawning grounds in the river where they themselves were hatched and spent their first years. The fish gather in Pukovik Bay, waiting for the right water temperature. When conditions are just right, they'll start the journey upriver. In the lower reaches, the water flows slowly, but at the top of Pool 16, there are some larger rocks and boulders where we find the first fishing grounds. The first real rapids are at pools 10 to 12, and some fish pause here, especially in the spring. We now get a stretch with variable currents, but at Pool 4, the fish experience calmer waters that continue to Pool 1 and Kungsforsen. This is a safe rest place for the fish, and most newly arrived spring trout don't go further up the river. However, salmon and autumn trout have much further to go in their journey. They may rest a while in Pool 17 above Kungsforsen. The river now becomes more winding with both rapids and quieter stretches. There are lots of lovely fishing spots, marvellous scenery, even though we're in the middle of the community. Following a longer stretch of rapids at Pool 32 in Rosendala, you come to the Vitskövle area. The scenery becomes wilder, and the Mörrum River provides not only good fishing spots, but also some delightful views. At Svängsta, the fish make their way up the first flight of fish steps, and soon after they come to the Knagglid area. Hemsjö, 25 kilometres from the sea, used to be as far as the fish could get, but two new salmon channels bypassing the dams have opened up new areas for fishing and breeding. At Hareness, the river narrows and the scenery becomes wilder. This is the last fishing area before the migration ends at the Fridefors power station. May is here and they should be coming. Large shiny salmon rolling their gleaming silvery bodies in the Murrum pools. It's these gigantic salmon that are the magnet, as well as the chance to get your name engraved on the May Salmon trophy. Every year, a lucky fisherman achieves immortality by catching May's largest salmon on a fly. As the word of the first salmon spreads along the river, the banks are filled with hopeful fishermen, prepared to fish all permitted hours of the day and night. The supply of salmons varied over the years, but the hopes of fishermen are always constant. One of the attractions on the 11th of May, Murrum's National Day, is the demonstration of seine net fishing, which brings both locals and visitors out in large numbers. This year, the water levels are unusually high, and the few salmon that have made it up the river escaped the net.
Nee, mach mit dem Gaff auf. Und das Sto. Komm, Ulf, hier. Schaffen wir das? Bist du nicht hier irgendwo hin? Ulf? Jetzt, komm. Spöt open. Okay. Er soll ruhig sein. Ich darf ihn nicht mehr. Hast du ihn ruhig? Oh, ich will holen. Fertig. Nicht auf den Fuß. Warte. Weiter vorne. Danke dir. Ja! Oh, ich werd verrückt. Ich werd verrückt. Oh. Ich bin so glücklich. Yes, ist alles hat sich. Von meiner Frau. Hier, das ist.
A successful catch. Perhaps his wife's lucky musket did make all the difference. The Mörrum River has a unique breed of large salmon, and May sees the largest of these coming upriver. During their 3 to 5 years of growth in the Baltic, they've reached an impressive size. These early rising May salmon can be compared to the Scottish Springer, but this is much smaller than the Murrum salmon. Fishing for salmon in May became popular only after the May Salmon Trophy was introduced. Michael Flodin was one of the people behind the idea. I started fishing in Murrum during the late 70s when I was a teenager, and it wasn't long before I met Leo Postonen, another salmon-mad fisherman from Gothenburg. We became close friends and fished together a lot, especially in Murrum, for 4, 5 or 6 weeks every year. We were both very enthusiastic about salmon fishing and the big early migrating salmon. Leo became a master at catching these early salmon. I had to make a lot more effort to catch these fish. At one time, he seemed to find one behind every stone. Anyway, during this period, prizes were awarded at Mörrum, the most important being the Rolf Wilhelmsson Trophy for fly fishing. More often than not, the biggest fish caught was a coloured autumn salmon, which was how I won. Leo and I felt that a prize for catching an early migrating salmon was needed, so we went to Kurt Johansson, who was the Fisheries Authority manager at the time, and suggested awarding a new trophy. Kurt thought it was a brilliant idea. As Leo was an artist and sculptor, he was asked to make the prize, a salmon tail waving in the water. And while even salmon fishermen get older, this happened all of 16 years ago. So it's quite a few years since the prize was awarded for the first time. And it's pleasing to see that a lot of the genuine Murrum fishermen have won the prize, the really skillful anglers who've devoted so much time to finding these large, early migrating salmon. Perhaps you shouldn't compete in salmon fishing or award prizes, but if anything should be encouraged, it's fishing for these early arrivals. The best fight and the best fish. Ove Andreasson is an experienced local fisherman who's managed the feat of catching the year's May salmon twice. It was the 21st of May 2001. The first major salmon migration was underway in Mörrum, and I was fishing in pool 15. I hooked this fish, had a really tough fight among the stones. Must have taken 20 to 25 minutes before we landed it. A superbly beautiful fish, 17.88 kilos and 118 centimetres in length. It won me the May Salmon Trophy for 2001. It must be said that catching a May salmon in the Mörrum River isn't easy. Many have tried, but few have succeeded. On a normal day, only a couple of fish are caught, despite the many hours of effort of many fishermen. But perhaps it's just this that's the attraction. This ultimate goal, catching the fish of your dreams, is what attracts fishermen from all over Europe to the Mörrum River. The likelihood of catching a fish isn't great, but the knowledge that if a fish bites it may well be over 10 kilos, that really is strong motivation. And sometimes everything can suddenly be very easy. When all the bits of the puzzle fall into place, You're at the right place at the right time, you can catch lots. Even if May fishing seems very unpredictable, you can see a pattern. A lot of fish are caught by very experienced fishermen who devote a lot of time to their fishing. The combination of experience and perseverance is what pays off in the long run.
Den verkar inte sådär jättefisk. Gör det inte, va? Det är ingen jättefisk. Men den är inte så lite.
Jag är på rätt läge.
Ja, ju. Vi ser vad man ska... Ulf, hjälper du mig? Hjälper du mig? Vad vill du ha, Patrik? Grattis! Åh, vad gott!
Murrum springs to life during the fishing season, attracting over 12,000 fishermen each year. A lot of these visitors come from outside Sweden, making the fishing truly international. A wide selection of services for all these visitors is available in the area. There's accommodation at all levels, from camping, bed and breakfast, and hotels, such as the Valhalla Hotel, which has been the main watering hole for anglers since the premiere in 1941. There are plenty of restaurants. You can climb out of pool number 1, roll down your waders, and walk straight from your fishing into a cafe for a quick lunch. Or you might prefer to sit on the terrace overlooking pool 17 and see how other fishermen are doing. If you need some more tackle or just some advice, there are lots of tackle shops stocking equipment specially suited to Mörrum fishing. All the advertising and other signs connected in one way or another with angling confirm that fishing plays a central role in Mörrum. The long tradition of fishing for salmon means that a lot of record catches have been noted. The Mörrum River has always been renowned for the size of its salmon, and many fishermen have landed the fish of their dreams here. When the fish are being put through their paces in one of the pools near Salmon World, a large group of spectators gathers, both fishermen and curious tourists, to witness the battle.
Jag tycker det. Kämpa för livet. Ja, fy fan vilket drag det var igen.
Ja, det är starka.
Ja.
Ja, det är bra att du tar den fram. Verkar som du inte får in den bland bockarna där, du. Jag tar den. Han tar den där. Alltså.
At one time, the gaff was the most common tool used to land a fish, but many of today's fishermen think it's a shame to use it on such a beautiful fish as the salmon. One of the many inveterate fly fishermen who've moved from other countries to Murrum for the sake of the fishing is Markus Zimmer from Germany. His efforts have borne fruit. He has his name engraved on the May salmon trophy. It was the 17th of May 2002, 8 in the evening. A lot of fish had come into pool 1 over the neck, and one giant of a fish had stopped by a stone. 3 others, apart from myself, were trying to catch it for about 2 hours. And at 8 o'clock, I tried again and got a bite. It had taken a small black fly. Soon after, the fight began and lasted about an hour. The fish rushed down by the stony edge, and in less than 20 seconds it was in pool 2. I had to follow it over all the stones in the middle of the river. It leapt up a few times and I landed it in pool 2. It weighed 20.62 kilos. On the veranda of his farm just outside Murrum, Markus shows us a very finely made cast of his dream fish. But being the impassioned Murrum fisherman he is, he dreams of even bigger salmon. This is what they should look like. It took just to the right of the innermost stone over there. I got a good movement in the line and he came up and bit. After 5 sessions and 4 days. I don't care what it weighs, as long as it's silver, bright and healthy. Just fantastic, absolutely wonderful. One of the younger fishermen who are often to be found at the Murrum pools is Jakob Törnqvist from Kalmar in Sweden. Only 17, he has already fished here for 5 seasons. Jacob loves salmon fishing and his biggest to date is 11 kilos. but he dreams of catching a glittering silver salmon of 20 kilos or more, and if possible in pools number 4 or 12, his favourites. Jacob likes the Mörrum River because of the chance of catching a large salmon and because of all the friendly people you can meet. Even if it might be a long time between catches, he feels that all the days spent fishing are worthwhile. Sometimes he has his doubts. Jacob shares the tent with a couple of friends. Parts of the river are within a nature reserve, and the environmental protection rules don't allow camping. So 2 simple campsites have been organised by the river where you can park your caravan or pitch your tent. It's not a proper campsite, offering only basic services, but it's an attractive alternative being so close to the fishing waters. A lot of fishing spots are very good when the water's high. When the salmon's taken the fly, you need to know what to do to avoid problems. You can't possibly land a large fish here, but using the wire you can make a spectacular turn into Whiskey Island with a taut rod gripped firmly. The hoop net has been used traditionally for hundreds of years to catch salmon and sea trout at Kungsforsen. Today it's used to catch breeding fish for the hatcheries, which will later release fry to increase stocks. Kungsforsen has lots of good places for hoop netting, and the holes can hold lots of fish. Anders' personal record is 11 fish in the hoop net from one attempt. This trout's too small to be used for breeding. Small sea trouts, a bit too small. He can go back in. On the 4th of October 1993, Anders caught a giant trout weighing 18.36 kilos in the hoop net. This male fish is the largest registered sea trout ever caught in the world and can be seen in the exhibition at Salmon World. Sometimes you might think that the Mörrum River has just too many fishermen, is right in the middle of a built-up area and doesn't offer any feeling of being close to nature. But nothing could be further from the truth. The river's a vital artery, providing a sanctuary for wildlife and plants in its natural valley. And we mustn't forget that we're just one of the species who share this river and its life-giving water with many others. There are fantastic natural woodland parks with massive beech trees and while a lot of the pools in the lower reaches flow right through the community, you can find a lot more surprisingly private fishing waters which bring you close to nature. When you venture further up the Mörrum River system, you encounter very different scenery, almost a wilderness, which makes it hard to believe you're still on the same river. You can fish alone in smaller and more intimate waters than downstream, but in magnificent surroundings. What's so amazing is that these waters are so close to the more popular areas. Just a short car ride from the lively activity of Murrum, you come to this tranquility and a completely different fishing experience. Few are the happy fishermen who've landed a salmon over 20 kilos, but to have landed 2 of them is rare indeed. Kent Håkansson, just like Ove Andreasson, has his name engraved twice on the May Salmon trophy. It was the 10th of May, year 2000, when I came down to Pool 4 after work. My mate Lars arrived at the same time, and being so polite, I let him go first. Not long after, he landed a very big salmon. I was just as happy as he was, having let him try his luck before me. It took a while before we landed the fish, at 17.6 kilos, the biggest of the season so far. Lars disappeared quickly, hurrying away to the weigh-in and to get the pictures taken. I sat down for a while before going out to the same place where Lars had caught his fish, and got a bite at exactly the same spot. This was a big one. How big I couldn't tell as the fight started off quietly. But when I got it on a short line and started fighting, the fish realised the seriousness of the situation and rushed straight over the river, ending with a leap and almost landing on the other bank. Then it rushed up to Pool 3, one of the longest rushes I've ever experienced, and it was getting close to Pool 2 before it stopped. It turned here, and I got it down again, really close, when it tried to get down to the bend. I realised I couldn't let it run here with rapids and a bridge that's difficult to pass with a fish on the hook. So I released some pressure to fool him. He turned his head upstream and I could lead him up again and eventually land him thanks to the 3 fishermen who rushed to help. On land, I realised how big the fish was. A 130 centimetre long salmon weighing 23.9 kilos. This is the biggest salmon I've ever caught, and I don't think I'll ever get anything bigger, but I haven't given up hoping. Kent's fish is the largest May salmon caught in Murrum in the 21st century, so far. Ulf Seal, another of the well-known faces on the river, is a real Mörrum fisherman. When you meet him on the river, he seems really obsessed with fishing. But this isn't surprising, as his year consists of 2 parts: the fishing season and waiting for the next fishing season. When the salmon come to Murrum, Ulf takes his holidays. Nothing can come between him and the fishing, but the many hours spent on the river always give a good result. When you've been waiting so long, this is just great.
Hänger du med Johan?
Vänta lite, den är inte färdig än. Den är i gräset där.
Den är i gräset.
Ja.
Den är fortfarande i gräset.
Ja, den står där nere.
Nu har jag väntat så länge, kan jag vänta 2 minuter till?
Gött.
Vad gott! Vad skönt! Tack så mycket! Vad skönt!
The May salmon season is over. The biggest May salmon caught this season, 2006, and weighing in at 15.9 kilos, was landed by the Dane Jan Grunwald. In June, peace descends over the river. Warm summer days are here, and a lot of people leave for home. But June and July still offer lots of interesting and challenging fishing. The fish are now in their home waters and play hard to get, but lots of small salmon, grilse, always come upriver during the summer. But a little summer rain can work wonders, and on cooler days the fish become more active, offering the chance of some really good fishing. 20% of all the naturally produced wild salmon in the Baltic come from the Mörrum River, which, despite being much smaller than the northern Swedish rivers, is extremely important for the stocks of salmon in the Baltic. Surveys show that 98% of all Murrum salmons caught by commercial fishing at sea, while only 2% is caught on the river by anglers. Fishing for salmon and sea trout in the Mörrum River has suffered a downturn during the last few years, but no actions being taken to reverse this trend. This work ranges from multi-million euro investments by companies and organisations to the work of voluntary groups of anglers and friends of Murrum, all of whom want to improve fishing in these unique waters. One of the most important activities was the project involving a power company, the county authority, the Fisheries Protection Agency and the Environmental Protection Agency. In 2004, 2 new channels for fish were opened, passing the dam at Hemsjö, which had previously been the topmost point in the river for the annual migration. Now the length of river available for spawning has been increased from 25 to 40 kilometres. The Mörrum River Fishery Protection Association monitors the river and its development in a lot of ways. Water quality is very good, and the production of salmon and sea trout fry is high. Summer fishing becomes autumn fishing when the first sea trout migrants arrive. This takes place at the end of July and the beginning of August, and not many people are aware of these early migrations of really large sea trout. Both the summer air and the water are warm, so trying to catch one of these early autumn sea trout's a real challenge. Later in August and September, the water cools down and autumn fishing can really get going. The nights are darker now, and for most sea trout fishermen in Murrum, autumn fishing is the same as evening and night fishing. What could be more exciting than fighting a sea trout in the dark night of autumn?
Han gör inte mycket. Det får se. Där är han. Ja, nu springer du. Det är för rum. Så bleib stehen. Weiter nicht. Ich bringe dir den Fisch direkt über den Kescher. Dann nimmst du den Kescher hoch und hast du erledigt. Jawohl. Ein Loch höher noch, wenn es geht. So, ups. Okay. Ist der Flaske? Merk it. Hier, mein Schatz. Guck mal, ich wollte ihr erstmal eingeben, unserer Dame. So. Tack.
Drauf ist der kleine Luke.
Ach so, weiter. Skål för den nästa fisken.
Auf dich.
Auf den nächsten Fisch.
Sea trout in the Mörrum River are short, compact and very large, providing the fly fisherman with a unique fishing experience. There aren't many places in the world that can compete with the size of the sea trout found in Murrum. The Mörrum River in Sweden and the Rio Grande in southern Argentina are the only other places where you have a chance to get acquainted with sea trout weighing over 10 kilos. The life of a sea trout is slightly different to that of a salmon. The sea trout keeps close to the river's estuary during most of the time it's growing up. It may go on some longer trips, but these are always near the coast, which protects it from the drift nets of the commercial fishermen in the Baltic. The sea trout starts its migration for mating much later than the salmon, and so is in much better condition when it returns to the sea in the spring.
86.
Stor överkant.
De är starka på dagen.
Så jävla stor.
Now that was quite a fish. Sea trout may not be the only fish interested in the flies during autumn fishing. The large salmon which migrated in May, and which seem to have disappeared during the warm summer months, become more lively in the cooler waters. If the fly gets too close, you might even make contact. Other fishermen will often help you to land a fish, especially if the banks are steep and there's lots of vegetation. But even with the help of an experienced fisherman like Ulf Sill, things don't always go quite as you expected. Apart from the large salmon, the river usually has a lot of smaller salmon, grilse, that have come upriver during the summer. But this summer's been very dry and warm, so most of the grilse stayed in the sea. They can miss a year and migrate upriver next summer if conditions weren't good enough.
Det är mjölksyra i armarna. Man är inte riktigt van. Ja. Ja. Faktiskt.
At first, Ulf and Lars thought they'd got a giant trout on the fly,
Det är en stor fisk.
but the longer they fought, the more it became clear that it was a large female salmon on the hook.
Upp. Inte ner för nacken.
You might think you've lost the fish when it rushes down the rapids, but the situation can be saved by moving quickly and working hard.
Stå. Ta dem med hov. Och hålla mig.
Sveaskog, who manage the river, need fish for breeding in the hatcheries, so Ulf calls Anders at the fisheries office. A large female salmon is worth her weight in gold. Anders arrives without delay to take the fish. No salmon are released into the Mörrum River from these hatcheries. All salmon production depends on Mother Nature. However, Sveaskog do supply other nearby rivers with salmon fry.
Ja. En bra fisk då.
After years of falling catches, some fishermen are pessimistic. But if you examine the statistics over a longer period, you can see that these dips appear regularly. Everyone's well aware of the threats posed in the Baltic, and Murrum's developed a range of activities to improve conditions for salmon and sea trout, both in the Baltic and in the river itself. The numbers of fishermen visiting Murrum has increased over the years, and we can take our responsibility by limiting our catches of the fish, which have made the journey upriver to spawn. If we continue in our different ways to support the development of the Mörrum River, there's every likelihood that these unique and exciting fishing waters will be preserved for future generations. The last fishermen have left the river. Silence and tranquility descends over the valley. But under the surface, there's full activity. The circle is closed. The next generation of Murrum salmon and sea trout are conceived, returning in the future to this river, perhaps for a meeting with the next generation of fly fishermen.